Hey y'all, it's me, Omari Akil, and I'm back for the third episode of The Breakdown. I'm here to talk game design and the inspirations behind them. The designer for this week's game already answered all my questions and gave me the insight I need to break down the game and share that with you. Now today we're looking at Vigilante. This game was designed by Reed Mascola and published by Paranoia Rising Games. This game lives in a universe filled with superheroes and supervillains battling it out in the middle of the streets. But not everybody is who they seem, and it's up to you to figure out who is who before it's too late. Now let's talk gameplay. Each player is in control of a team of heroes. You'll be doing actions on your turn to try to get closer to meeting your primary objective. A scenario is chosen at the start of the game, which will determine which identities and allegiances are going to be included. Then, each player is randomly dealt one of these identities, and the game can begin. Now, on your turn, there are a list of actions you can choose from. You're going to be able to do 4 each round, as well as play cards that you've collected throughout the game. Now, the actions are things like draw a card, trade a card, attack a villain, or recruit a hero. But since this is a social deduction game, every action that you take is going to give other players information about potentially what your allegiances and objectives are. Some of the cards, as well as some of the hero special abilities, are also going to be useful when you're trying to figure out the identities of other players. At the end of a round, every player will roll dice in secret behind their player screen and use one of them to trigger events that could have positive or negative effects on all other players. This is another decision point that can give information about a player's true intentions. The game ends after a set number of rounds depending on the player count and the scenario chosen, when all players then reveal what their true identities are, and you can see who was able to complete their objective successfully. Now let's take a look at some of the components. And when you first look at the components of Vigilante, you don't immediately recognize you're playing a social deduction game. There is a central game board which has the various decks that you'll be using throughout the game, as well as the hero market from where you recruit heroes, and space for the events that also doubles as a round counter. Each player has 4 action tokens, 2 event dice, a player mat that has space for your team of heroes as well as their equipment, and your allegiance tokens. You also have a player screen which has a reference guide on the back and also hides your dice during the event phase. Now that you know a little bit about how the game works and some of its components, let's dig in a little deeper. Vigilante includes a set of light adventuring mechanics all wrapped up in some super-powered social deduction mechanics. The adventure mechanics include building up a team of heroes, giving them the best equipment, and using them to take down villains and put them in jail. Each hero has an attack value, a health value, and a special ability. You get better, stronger heroes by using influence from the cards in your hand to recruit from the hero market. Every time you decide to attack a villain, you reveal a card from the villain deck, take damage to your team, and if your attack is high enough after taking damage, you get to defeat that villain card. But depending on your objective and what you know about your opponent's objectives, you may approach taking these actions in an entirely different way. As I understood this game more, I started to compare it to games like Betrayal at House on the Hill, and one game that specifically was mentioned by Reed during our conversation, Dead of Winter. Now these games all have players attempting to achieve an objective, but at the same time there's a potential for sabotage, either directly or indirectly, just based on the scenario. Dead of Winter does this by giving every player a hidden objective, sometimes those objectives being in direct conflict with the main objective of the group. And that means that you need to keep a close eye on how players are using their actions and objectives in Dead of Winter, especially if you think there might be a traitor. Now, Vigilante can have a very similar vibe, especially in the beginning of the game when you don't have a lot of information about who players really are. Now, Reed admits that very early versions of Vigilante were, in fact, more like Dead of Winter, but he decided to take it more in the social deduction direction since that is one of his favorite game genres. Now, you start to see these differences pop up in a few different places. One of those is the allegiance token. All players have 4 allegiance tokens, one good, one neutral, one evil, and a 4th that matches your actual alignment. This means that players using cards like Active Investigation to take a peek at your allegiance tokens can ultimately lead to them knowing exactly who you are. This is also an opportunity for deceitful players to give incorrect information depending on what they've seen and what their objectives are. This mechanic is more like something you would see in Secret Hitler, where viewing a player's actual identity is a decision point, and whether or not you spread true or false information can have a profound impact on the game. The same thing can be said about Vigilante during the event phase. That's when players all roll 2 dice behind their screens, and they get to choose one to put forward, which may or may not trigger events. When the events both harm and help players, you can choose the one that's most relevant to your objective, but ultimately place the blame on the dice instead of taking responsibility for your actions. Reed said his inspiration for this part of the game comes from Dark Moon. In Dark Moon, you roll a set of dice with positive and negative values on them behind a screen, and then you use those dice to cast votes against which players will be quarantined, but also to potentially help or hurt your chances of dealing with equipment malfunctions. And lastly, one of Reed's favorite parts of the game's design is the neutral identities. They are designed to be a little more unpredictable compared to the good and evil identities, which makes it harder for you to try to figure out what their objectives actually are. And the same thing can be said about the Tanner and Werewolf or the Renegade in Bang the Dice game, which makes those games that much more interesting. Vigilante is live right now on Kickstarter, so check the video description for the link. Thanks again for watching. I'm Omari Akil. This is The Breakdown, brought to you by Tabletop Backer Party. See you soon.